I'm Richard Murphy, and this is another in my series of videos about what I think is important in tax justice in 2021. These all reflect the fact that tax justice has been going for a long time now and it's had enormous success. But if it's going to carry on being successful, then I think it needs to begin to change its focus. You can't do forever what you've already done, particularly if much of what you set out to achieve is underway. Now, one of the other things that I think tax justice really needs to focus upon now, if it is to make progress, is tax transparency. Now, tax transparency is an interesting issue because I don't see how we can create a fair and just tax system unless we understand what that tax system is. And yet around the world, it is very common for people to not be able to access the information that they need, to be able to understand whether or not they have a tax liability. They can't access the help they require from a tax authority to be able to determine what that liability might be. They may not be able to find access to an appeals process if the whole mechanism of tax goes wrong for them. At a bigger level, there's an enormous lack of accountability around the globe of tax authorities for the taxes that they manage. It staggers me that we now understand that there are 5 tax gaps, and I have prepared a video on tax gaps and I'll put a link to that below this one. The 5 tax gaps include, for example, the cost of the allowances and the reliefs that many governments give to those in a society because they think it worthwhile providing them with exemptions and allowances for offset against their income before tax is paid. And yet there is almost no transparency in many countries about what those allowances and reliefs cost, why they exist, when they might end, and why they're justified. That is an absence of tax transparency, which obscures the management of the tax system and is very often used to create the argument, we can't afford to do something, when in fact that is simply, of course, untrue. What else is lacking with regard to tax transparency? Well, I've done work that shows that, for example, I can't always understand the tax that is claimed to be paid by large companies because their accounts do not require that they disclose their full tax account in a year. So they do not need to explain where the tax charge in their accounts is posted in all the various places where it may be located, and they do not need to reconcile that with the liability that they owed at the start of the year, the tax that they paid during the course of the year, and the liability that they owed at the end of the year. And as a consequence, we may not understand the contribution that those companies make to society, however much work we've done to date on trying to make sure that is fair, and however much work we might have done to date on country-by-country reporting, for example. So there are big issues still to go there. There are other areas of tax transparency that are simply missing. In many countries, we can't get the accounts of companies that are obviously liable to pay tax. If we can get those accounts in a place like the UK, then the tax pay figure will very often be missing from those accounts quite legally. But nonetheless, why is a question that we need to know. Surely we should know about the contribution that a company makes for the enormous benefit that society provides to it by giving it limited liability and so protection from its creditors in the event that something goes wrong and the company goes bust. This is tax transparency at work. And so too is the accountability of the government for how it spends the tax revenues that it receives. Now, I've explained again in other videos that there is no reason why all government spending must be funded by tax, and that's an absolute truth. But the government of every country in the world does collect tax revenues, and pretty universally people, well, to some degree resent it and certainly wonder what the heck it's used for because they can't explain it. And yet the quality of the reporting by governments of the revenues they receive and what they spend the money on is very poor, some notable exceptions apart. And here, I have to say, go and look at the accounts of the governments of Jersey and the Isle of Man, and you'll see how to explain in fairly straightforward terms what a government is doing. I know they're small, but the principles could be translated to other governments very well. So the point is that tax justice actually requires there to be tax transparency to prove that there is an improvement in the inequality that it is set up to address. and yet it's not demanded enough transparency from the right people, and in particular governments, to ensure that this is being delivered and that people can access tax justice within their own personal tax affairs. Now, to me, that's important because we aren't talking about tax justice merely with regard to tax havens, merely with regard to international corporations, and merely with regard to international tax matters. We're talking about tax justice as it impacts everyone in a society, every business in a society, every person who's dependent upon a government within a society, and how we can change the way in which resources are allocated to make sure that people can genuinely get their needs met. That can't be done unless we can measure progress. And so a campaign for greater transparency and understanding of the data surrounding tax systems and those who pay tax, for example, trusts and companies as well as individuals, is really fundamental. I believe that this is an issue which tax justice should be looking at in 2021 and campaigning on, because if we did, we'd end up with a much better tax system that would be accountable to all. More tax will be paid, I believe, as a result, and we would have a better outcome in society as a consequence, and that matters. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in what I've been saying in this video, please subscribe. There is a button below the viewing screen. If you're interested in what I have to say on Twitter, I'm at Richard J. Murphy on that medium. If you want to look at my blog, that's taxresearch.org.uk, and we have a Facebook page as well, Richard J. Murphy. So one of those things will get you more information on what this video series is about, and I hope I'll see you again soon.